Hello, I'm very happy to welcome you to our session, Creating Your All-Star AI Team. My name is Ksenia. I'm founder of TuringPost.com, a media publication about AI and machine learning. We try to connect the dots for people who are interested in everything AI and machine learning. We cover the history, we follow the news, and try to highlight the trends to make it easier for people to make better decisions. I'm also co-founder of The Sequence, another newsletter about AI and machine learning. And as a publisher, I see a lot of requests from the startups to help build an AI team. And today we have great professionals here, so I want to ask them to introduce themselves, and I hope they will share some insights how to do that. Eve?
Hi, I'm Evie Cunningham. I'm an OBGYN physician by training, and I currently serve as the Chief of Virtual Care and Digital Health at Providence. Providence is a very large nonprofit health system spanning 8 states, 52 hospitals. We have about 10,000 employed providers. My team leads all of our telemedicine and virtual care programs. We have several very large scaled enterprise programs. And then we also have digital products that we've both incubated and have scaled within our department.
Hi, my name is Darien Acosta. I am currently the Chief AI Officer for an insurtech company called CoverWhale. We specialize in selling commercial trucking insurance. It's a very niche space, but we are very good at it. I have almost 20 years experience working in data. I've worked across a number of different industries: media, advertising, marketing, and insurance is my latest passion project.
Hey everyone, my name is Giovanni Everduin. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Commercial Bank International, which is, as the name suggests, a bank based out of Dubai. A little bit for those of you who don't know Dubai, the UAE, the government is really pushing hard to establish itself as kind of like the leading hub for AI and the metaverse and crypto and anything really. And so it's a really interesting situation where the government is pushing the private sector to progress. And so my role traditionally was really, a lot more boring banking strategy, but increasingly now it has to do with innovation. And so I look after our venture arm, our innovation lab, and a big part of that is finding real use cases, experimenting and finding use cases for things like AI, AR, the metaverse, crypto, and a bunch of other different things.
Thank you. So we have very varied perspectives here. And my first question would be, can each of you briefly share your experiences with building a successful AI team, and how was it, let's say, a year ago, and how did it change?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we incubate products, and we've been incubating a product at Providence for the last 2 years called MedPearl, which is essentially a clinical content management and digital assistant product for providers at the point of care. And the first thing I would say about building an AI team specifically is you gotta really understand what the complex problem is that you're trying to solve. And then the product play that goes around solving that problem. And does AI fit in with the solution that you're trying to build? So it doesn't start with just hiring a bunch of people that have expertise in AI. It's like, what am I trying to solve? How am I going to solve it? And what is the team that I need to build around that? And so we built a team. We have a team of data scientists, engineers, product managers, UI, UX designers, and clinicians. And we are tied at the hip to each other. There's probably chat feeds going on my phone right now because we're in constant communication and collaboration, and we're iterating constantly around solving the problem with this product. So I think that that's kind of where it starts. And I would say where we are today versus a year ago, generative AI is just going to be completely game-changing for healthcare. I'm really excited, but as you all probably know, healthcare tends to move more slowly. But the world has really changed for us since the release earlier this year. And so we're really thinking through, we had this great product that was already being used and leveraged at the point of care, and now we're going to make it even that much better as we start to integrate AI use cases and capabilities into that roadmap.
Just a follow quick question, what competences are you looking for now, specifically for healthcare?
Well, definitely, people with the ability to, with data science backgrounds. So, and then we have clinicians. We actually have clinicians with a lot of informatics backgrounds as well, so that they've worked clinically and they've also worked on the technology side. So those skill sets are really important. And of course, you need developers and engineers and the such.
So I think it's an interesting question. Certainly one that has changed with the current generative AI emergence. I think if you asked me this question 6 months ago, 12 months ago, I would have said, you hire people who have an experience in research, who have PhDs in artificial intelligence, who can build their own algorithms or predictive models. But I think what has happened with generative AI is that the landscape has completely changed. Gen AI can fit into almost any pillar of the company. It's almost like a new version of tech. Whereas in previous .com companies, you hire a CTO to manage all the engineering functions. Now with Gen AI, you essentially hire a head of AI who touches every single department of the company. And I would say that changes the nature of how to think of AI in companies in general. And in terms of skill sets of things that I look for now when I hire is I'm looking for people who have experience in ML ops. It's not about whether they've been able to derive their own formulas to create a state-of-the-art predictive algorithm. Now it's about can you take these tried and true industry standard models that already exist out there on the internet and can you productionalize it? It's now almost like a plug and play of taking these models, put it into the cloud, having engineers to kind of sync things up together, and delivering business value. So it's a very different ecosystem now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess for us to build on what you've been saying, I think we started, my board was like, let's do this, let's hire a bunch of people and go crazy. And then very quickly we realized what you said, right? Which is, what problems are we looking to solve really, right? What are we trying to get out of this? And so honestly, right now, I'm solving for two things. I'm not even getting to the sexy part. I need to fix my data because our data is horrible, right? And so that's the first and foremost thing. And we're playing around with synthetic data and a couple of other things. And then the second thing is, honestly, I need to teach my business, right, what problems they should look for. Because a lot of them are just doing stuff without necessarily reflecting on what they're doing or why. And so we do a lot of these education sessions where we work with partners who come in and kind of go oh, here's something you could do, right? Or here's something that AI can do. And then hopefully it kind of sparks a little bit of thinking for them to see, oh, okay, so now that I have that, maybe there's a problem that I never even realized I had, or there's a problem that I never could tackle that we can fix with AI. And so the skill set I'm looking for the most right now is what I call translators, people that understand the business and understand the opportunity of the technology to kind of start figuring out where do we want to focus our efforts. And in terms of actual skill sets, I'm perfectly happy to kind of borrow or rent that from the market right now, because I don't think it makes sense for us at the skill that we're at to invest in that.
And bridging the gap, what are the main challenges?
The board and their ridiculous expectations that you hire a bunch of people and it just gets look, I've been talking about not AI per se, but analytics for 10 years. And the question is, the problem is the same, which is people want cool stuff. You ask them, what exactly do you want to get out of it? They don't really know, right? They're like, I want AI because, it's cool and I hear it everywhere. And okay, well, what particular problem do you want to solve? I don't know, just give me some predictive AI. So the hard part really is to get people a little bit back to reality and kind of set reasonable goals that relate to the business where you can actually calculate an ROI and then figure out, okay, so how can we solve it? And the thing I'll say, as much as I'm really bullish on AI, I think a lot of times when people use AI, you can solve that easily without ever touching AI. That's my thesis on this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say there's no real use cases for AI, because I think there are. But I think many people are pretty immature in their journey still, where you probably don't need to go to AI and hire like a whole bunch of people and some amazing technology to start getting some initial hypothesis out and kind of test some of those.
Is this I want AI, did it become much worse since generative AI happened?
I mean, everybody's an AI expert now, right? Like, that's the problem, right? Everybody's like, oh, I was with ChatGPT the other day. Okay, I'll say one thing, I'll let them tell. But the worst thing that I'm dealing with right now, from an AI perspective, is trying to make people understand that when you upload sensitive company or customer information to ChatGPT, it's not going to some public goods company, right? Like, that information is going somewhere. And so people don't understand it because they're like, oh, I've been using ChatGPT to make this report. I'm like, wait, what now? Like, oh my God. So yeah, it's gotten infinitely more difficult.
Well, yeah. So, how do you mentioned that you try to educate people? But can you go into details? Like, what do you actually do with the speed of development of AI?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think everybody's sort of scrambling, right? Because this explosion has happened. I remember my CTO calling me like last year, late last year, saying this chat GPT thing is going to happen and like you need to be paying attention to it. And I was pulled in a million different directions at that time. I wasn't really paying attention to it until I did finally take the time to sit down and play with it and realize that this is going to be transformational. It's going to be really messy for the next 5 years in healthcare, but it's also going to be pretty game changing. And I did the same with I have a clinical content team of clinicians, and had them start educating themselves. I wouldn't say there was like formalized education or programs for them. Now everything's exploding on LinkedIn and YouTube, and doctors doing videos and things like that. But I was like, you guys need to get educated. We have a strategic partnership with Microsoft, so we're very fortunate in the fact that we actually get some access to subject matter expertise, being able to meet with execs over there, kind of understanding what's on the roadmap. So I think we've gotten some benefit of some early education as a health system via that partnership and engagement with stakeholders over there. But I mean, it is very challenging coming to conferences like this. Who knew that this conference was going to be as bustling as it has been so far. So, and then we also have an internal education program with our data science team and the analytics team, where they're trying to kind of ensure that there's professional development within that team and that they're staying on track and trying to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I personally think the excitement is important because you can capitalize on that excitement. It's like you have people who are suddenly engaged and want to know more about this because it's something that everyone's talking about. You turn on the news and ChatGPT has basically accomplished this amazing thing. The technology is moving so quickly. People don't want to be left behind. So I think it's the responsibility of leaders at companies from large to small to take that energy, harness it, and create internal education programs where you're really training people how to use it, telling them what's okay to ask, what's not okay, what's PII. Like there are people at my company that I'm like, oh yeah, you don't want to use it for this specific question because it has PII in it, and they're like, what's PII? Yeah, and it's like, oh, things like social security numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's clearly a lot of education that needs to happen. But I do think there are things companies can do to mitigate the data privacy aspect of it, and that is like using ChatGPT's API rather than the front-facing interface.
Want to add anything? No?
No, I'll add one. I'll give an anecdote, which is the very first time we were sat with the board and we had prepared this McKinsey-like presentation on the benefits of AI and a roadmap. And you could really tell they weren't getting it and it was kind of boring. And so at some point I'm like, you know what? I whipped out my MacBook. I'm like, okay, let me show you Midjourney, which I have running on my Discord server. And so we spent 45 minutes and them just throwing out stuff. And then if you know Midjourney is an image generator, and Midjourney just making it. And they were just blown away. And I was like, wait, so we spent all this time making this like super fancy technical presentation, but what I really needed to do is show you. And so then we went from that to, if you're familiar with 11 Labs, it's really awesome, really scary too, voice synthesizer. And so we kind of showed them how easy it is to do that, which by the way, is becoming a very big problem for banks in terms of how do you validate that a customer really is who they say they are, but we'll probably talk about that later. But I realized one important thing, and that's kind of with any technology, but particularly with AI, it's like show, don't tell, right? And that goes for anyone. Like if you don't have to explain to them how it works, you just show them what it can do. And that's the cool part. I kind of feel like with technologies, most people don't need to know what's under the hood. In fact, when you have to explain what's under the hood, you're never going to get adoption. And so it's like you all use Gmail, right? But many people may not necessarily know the technical architecture of IMAP and POP3, and you don't need to know that. You just need to know that you go in and you send an email and it arrives somewhere. So for us, showing that and kind of giving people the excitement, like, whoa, you can actually do that. And I said this and it just shows me an image of that. That was the most powerful learning, but also at the same time, creating a lot of excitement. That session, that 45-minute Midjourney session, approved my entire budget for the year. And it's not a joke. No, I swear to God. And it's because they, you know what I mean? Like they got it. They saw it. They saw the magic of it. They experienced it. And they're like, okay, and now figure out how we can use this for the bank.
Well, if we're speaking about hiring and firing and finding AI talents, so since open source, since Meta leaked Llama, I mean, not Meta, but since Llama was leaked and all the software development community started to experiment with it, do you see that you have a source for your AI talent in your software development departments?
Do you mean like a pipeline? Or
no, like software developers becoming AI specialists?
I mean, I think that our software developers are definitely like experimenting with it, and I think they use it even with like their coding, to augment their coding capabilities. In fact, our lead developer uses the Copilot product that I think is in GitHub. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know if I'm, but where he said that if he hadn't been using a product like that, that he would. I mean, it exponentially improved his ability to be more productive. So as to whether or not they're machine learning experts themselves, I mean, they're not necessarily, software developers aren't necessarily data scientists, so it is a little bit different of a skill set. But I certainly think that there's some opportunities for integration within those roles.
I think one of the main benefits of large language models is that like suddenly we live in a world where if you have the motivation to learn something, you can learn it. Like large language models makes understanding very complicated topics and subjects easier by translating it into a more accessible type of language. So if I'm looking to the engineering team to become AI experts, it really comes down to not whether they're capable of it, but whether they have the motivation. And if I think if we all want to stay competitive in the corporate and business environment and landscape, it's really a requirement to learn how to use these systems to extend our capability and knowledge. So I think at Cover Whale, we're really setting the bar high and expecting everyone to kind of augment how they work and their daily process in order to leverage and utilize this technology to move faster and to be smarter.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I echo that. I think access to information has never been easier, and I think it will only get easier over time. So I think there's no longer an excuse to not know. I think there's only a not wanting to know, which sometimes really frustrates me because a lot of my IT guys, they don't want to know. But at the same time, in their defense, as much as I find it frustrating, I also know that they have capacity issues. They're overworked, trying to fix horrible legacy systems and everything else. And nobody's rewarding them for, learning new skills because the use cases have not been developed, right? So it's kind of experiential. And so you do it because you want to do it. And I had to accept that not everybody wants to do it.
Mhm.
Not yet.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned, let's go to data privacy. You mentioned it a couple of times. So in era where data privacy and ethical considerations are becoming increasingly important, how do these considerations shape your team structure and approach to building an AI team?
I'll say something, I'll share some light about the horrible practices that banks do. We don't have a person that talks about ethics. We should have one. I think over time we will be mandated by the central bank to do that because consumer protection is a very important topic these days. And so this technology is really still new. And as a bank, that means you can kind of take advantage of it. But at some point you'll start having to be compliant. I'll give you an example of a use case for AI. Obviously, let's say credit cards as a product, right? Credit cards is by far the most profitable product for retail banking. And so we use AI and synthetic data to kind of pinpoint customers and kind of assess their credit worthiness, right? Which is, should we give you a loan? Should we give you a credit card? That makes sense. However, the dark side of that is I'm actually also very interested in knowing who are the people that are most likely to default on a monthly basis. However, will be able to repay within a 3-month period, right? Because it means I don't have to take provisions. Now, this is horrible because I'm preying on people's inability to pay, and that generates significant fees for me. But at the same time, we're a for-profit bank, so that's what we're doing. So with my commercial head, that makes a lot of sense. I can now target people where I know, like, oh, you're never going to be able to repay your credit card. However, on a 2-month rolling period, you will, and so I maximize my income from you. But at a personal level, I'm like, well, that's highly unethical because we're actually preying on people and using data to do that. And so, again, like these are some of the topics that I wrestle with. I have, my inner demons. Sometimes the commercial side wins because it's not just always my decision. But I think at some point there will be some, regulatory oversight where how can you use that information and how do you ensure that you don't really push people down the brink of, financial peril. Don't judge me.
Well,
I'm shedding secrets here.
about doing creepy things with people's data. Well, in healthcare, obviously, we have privacy and security, and being HIPAA compliant is just so incredibly critical to everything we do. And I would say that we have a lot of concerns, about from a cybersecurity perspective, like about how we're going to protect our data, our patients' data, especially as we bring more and more of these applications. And we're not going to build all of this technology ourselves. We are going to depend on vendors and an ecosystem as well to be able to do that. So that is something that I think keeps us up, many of us up at night. It's an exciting future, but then it's also, the challenges that go along with that from a privacy and security perspective. One thing that we have been on the forefront of in Providence is that we moved to the cloud in 2020. So we were pretty early and kind of on the bleeding edge, I would say, as a health system to be fully ready in a cloud computing environment, which really sets us up for the ability to create a secure, have a secure infrastructure for us to be able to experiment with AI and experiment with large language models. So I know not every health system is as far along in that journey, and they're really struggling. So they have a lot of technical debt to get to a place where they can do that securely going into the future.
I would say I think there's a reason why external regulation exists for our industry, like banking, insurance, and healthcare. It's because even if a company is operating in a benevolent manner, it can still potentially harm people in the long run. So I think there's a reason regulation exists. We should seek out and follow that regulation. I think internally it matters what part of the ecosystem you're working in. I think for the company I work for, our aim is basically to make the highway safer. We're selling commercial trucking insurance, and there's not a lot of, I think, harm we can potentially do in terms of how we use data, but we do have internal counsel. We have like roundtable meetings about this all the time. Like, what can we do? What can't we do? What makes us compliant? What wouldn't make us compliant? And I think it's an ongoing discussion, but I think everyone is sort of looking to the other company for direction, and maybe companies internally don't want to set that precedent themselves because it may restrict them.
So now it's more like a collegial decision of how to act. Do you think, like we have insurance here, banking, healthcare, do you think in the nearest future the AI team will have to have an ethicist on the board?
Yes, I mean, we already have ethicists involved in much of what we do in healthcare. We have ethicists, but yes, I mean, I think bias in particular is a huge challenge, especially when you're talking about healthcare and the implications of that. And so having somebody be able to bring that lens, or it's a competency, right, of anybody who's working in that area. It's a competency of the skill set that they have to have in order to be in that kind of a role.
I think for larger companies, it makes sense. I think for the thing about AI is that it does lend itself to sort of like a Silicon Valley startup business model, where you have like very slim teams who are kind of just cruising ahead and not really paying attention to, maybe the harm that they're doing. So I think you're going to see a lot of smaller companies kind of moving fast and breaking things, and it's going to create basically the regulators are going to have to step in and set rules. And you already see that in places like New York City, where they've already passed within the 5 boroughs legislation that restricts the ability for companies to use AI in job screenings. So they want to eliminate potential bias in the hiring process, because that's a very vulnerable part of the hiring landscape.
Thank you. Soon I will open. I will ask the audience to if you have any questions. But I have another question myself about where's this question? Is there any difference? So Gio is from Dubai, and is there any difference between hiring AI talents in the US and in the other parts of the globe? Also because, remote work and all that.
I mean, I can tell you my situation and you can tell me yours. Yeah, it's hard. Like, I think honestly, the concentration of developers, whether it's AI or anything else, is here in this country by far. There's a couple of pockets somewhere else, but for us, for instance, I think the UAE or Dubai is a very interesting. Saudi Arabia, they have a very interesting problem where they have a lot of money and they want to make it very attractive, but very few devs who actually want to come. And it's also because there's not many other devs there. And so, we were talking about this a little earlier. A lot of the developers I talk to, they're kind of like, what's the right word? They believe in this utopian kind of like, they're very hippie-like. And so coming to Dubai and the kind of stereotype that Dubai has, honestly, often for them, that's like something they don't want. And they want to be where all the other cool devs are and where all the other cool kind of startups are. And so it's a problem for us. So there's not many developers. There's a lot of startups coming in, but then you have to like either do it remote or fly people in. And it's actually a really big problem for us to get quality devs.
Yeah, when we first started building the product, MedPearl that I was talking about, the team was like completely international. We had people in Japan, we had people in Germany, we had people in the US on both coasts, and I think we were a completely virtual team. I mean, it started really during COVID. And now we have a pretty large team of developers and engineers in India that Providence has a large global center there with like 800 employees. So we have several stakeholders there. I would say that the subject matter expertise and the quality, the onshore team, it's just their capabilities. They just have more depth in their skill set. So they have to give a lot of direction. We don't get as much, it's not like a one-to-one from the onshore and offshore team. So a lot of the leadership around the product development comes from the onshore team. And I think now that we're starting to do more things in person, not to say that we're completely hybrid, but it is important to you can do a lot of this stuff virtually. You don't have to have everybody in person, but there is value in bringing the group together and doing some things on site from an efficiencies and just alignment and leadership perspective. So we are starting to do a little bit more of that and seeing quite a bit of value in those on-site, in-person meetings.
I think when it comes to technical ability, it doesn't matter where people are located. But when it comes to building culture, much easier to do in person. I think when myself as a hiring manager, when I'm looking at the types of devs or subject matter experts I want to hire, it sounds weird, but like I want to hire people who aren't trying to do the job for money. It's like data and AI is one of the most well-paying fields out there on the market, and you have a lot of people who are basically crowding in because they're like I want a high-paying job. But I think it's important to filter for people who actually have passion for the space, because that is really what makes a difference. And it's like finding a person who's willing to debate you on detail about why one algorithm is better than the other algorithm, or why we should do this, or take a chance on this like GitHub repository that no one's heard of, but like actually does this thing which might be really cool. If you find people like that, you don't have to worry about the other stuff.
I think that's a great point, right? And we have the opposite of that, which is if your value proposition to attract someone is purely money, and that's what you get. People that are motivated purely by money and not necessarily by their passion.
It's quite challenging. So does the audience have any questions? Please raise your hand and speak louder. So yeah, the question is how. Do you want a microphone?
How do you train internally, create your own training programs internally to mine your own gold from your own people, let's say?
So my comment would be that I think that's like a huge area of opportunity for us in healthcare. And to be completely honest, some of what we're hearing amongst our peers as well, clinicians, is that if you don't learn to adopt AI as a physician going into the future, you're going to become obsolete in your practice. It's going to be, now, there aren't exactly a ton of tools that you can use right at the bedside today that are out of the box, but it's going to become part of what we do in our clinical practice. We will have a dependency on this type of technology. And so as far as training folks and helping them understand what the technology can do, what its capabilities are, how we might end up using it in our clinical practice, I'm just speaking as a physician right now, I don't think that's been fully determined yet, but it is something that's going to be critical going into the future. I would also say there's a lot of experimentation going on. Like there's a lot of doctors who are just playing around with it or, using it, and they might not be using it in a safe way. They might not recognize what the limitations are. They don't even sometimes know what hallucinations are. And so there needs to be some just general education that we need to give across the board with our caregivers and our clinicians so that they understand, how this could fit into the clinical workspace and what's appropriate and what is not today.
I think you can, like most companies would adopt a top-down approach in terms of training, but where they basically get an all-hands company meeting where everyone must attend, and it's like 2 hours, and they go step by step of what's prompting, what's this, what's that. I think that can be effective, but I think you definitely want a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach where you're identifying people at different parts of the organization who are passionate about these specific topics and AI applications, and empowering them to have a voice in not only the larger org but in their departments, and allow them to become advocates. And that's sort of like distributed training and learning, where they're just kind of like teaching the person next to them how to use this specific like super prompt on ChatGPT, or use Midjourney to generate an image for a marketing campaign that they might not have thought about. It's just sort of important. If you can create a culture of learning, I think that's the best approach.
Yeah, let me touch on the first thing you said, right? Like, I feel that every consultant that like 3 years ago was a blockchain expert is now rebranded to like an AI expert, right? And they come with the same operating models and frameworks. They just, find and replace blockchain, AI. And so it's really hard, because the hard part is that these people come in and they teach you things, and if you don't know any better, you take that for granted, which is actually very dangerous. We do very similar to what Darien is saying. Like, we do brown bag sessions. Whoever wants to join can join. Who doesn't want to join, but I'm not going to force you. We kind of hope that by the people that join and get excited about this stuff, they go and tell more people. Then people go, oh, next time I want to join. We tend to bring in a speaker that we know who talks about a use case, and the hallucinations that you talked about. We touch a lot about the limitations of ChatGPT or AI in general. And so, for instance, like, we spend a lot of time talking about, I don't know if you heard this case about this lawyer that is now facing disbarment because he used ChatGPT, and it kind of either hallucinated or totally made up like a case history, right? And so these are real things. Like, even Sam Altman said that the problem with ChatGPT is that it's so convincing even when it's wrong, right? And so we're trying to tell people that, yes, it's amazing technology, but also it has significant limitations. And you need to be mindful of that, particularly when you deal with customer information or make decisions on someone's creditworthiness or anything like that.
I just want to add, from journalism perspective, that access to knowledge is so much easier right now. So basically, as part of our work, we collect all these courses for people and resources, how they can learn. And if before machine learning was like a very specific topic and you needed to have much more knowledge, technical knowledge, now if you're really interested and if you really want to know more about Gen AI and all that stuff, you have so much opportunities to do that. And that's why I ask about software developers, because I think all this cross functionality that happens now thanks to AI, the access is much easier. And I think we are out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you.